Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is the next video in the use case building series with UiPath, and today we are going to build a project which is called the identity card generation. Now this identity card generation can be used in education vertical for generating of the ID cards. It can be used in an enterprise for creating the ID cards of the new joiner, and the same process can be also used to generate the gate passes, right? So it's a kind of a mix and match project. You can modify the use case accordingly and you can create your own use case. Now before I move forward, let me quickly tell you why exactly I am making this video. So as you can see, I have got some of the requests on my Instagram, on my email, as well as on the YouTube channel, where people want to create a process for creating a visitor pass on a campus entry. Instagram, I got a request saying that, sir, I want to make a process to make ID cards with the help of UiPath, and he wanted to have some ideas. Now there are some requests where actually people want to understand how exactly ReFramework work without the queues, how we can implement a solution end to end without using queues. So before this one, we already have created an end to end use case which was called the HR offer letter generation, that was built in ReFramework with the help of queues. We have built the performer as well as the dispatcher in the ReFramework in two pieces, right? So this solution we are going to make in a single ReFramework. We would be having both the dispatcher and the performer in a single solution, which means that we are going to use ReFramework without the queues. So concept wise, we would be looking at how exactly can I use ReFramework with Datatable or without the queues. Okay, so before we move forward, I quickly want to demonstrate that what exactly is the solution we are going to build today. So let's have a quick demo. So I have this data file which is available in the folder. In the data file, I have all the records of the employee for whom we need to generate the identity cards. Okay, go here and run the file. In my UiPath, I can see that it is processing transaction number 1. It is creating the identity card. It has replaced the photo as well. So we'll just wait for the next one. Okay, so now it has got the next employee. As you can see, the robot is filling the identity card templates along with the photographs, right? For the last couple of them, we have got exception because I have intentionally put some data blank there. So let us see if this is behaving correctly or not. Let us go back to the folder and validate. Sign. So the first thing is, let me go and click on the data folder, and now you can see the robot has added a column in front of it which says that these many were successful. For this it was not able to create because the date of joining was blank, which is correct. For this, the image was not available in the folder. For these two, the employee code was missing. For this one, again, the date of joining was missing. Now let's go back to the folder and validate the ID cards. So 11 identity cards in the editable format and 11 PDF. So let me quickly open some of them and validate. Okay, so this looks good, right? So Sarah having a purchase, this is her, be positive, and this one. And in case the admin feels that no, I want to change something, we have this editable thing also available here. As an admin, I have received all of these identity cards, right? Let me click on any one of them and you can see that identity card robot has sent me this one which says sharing the identity card and gate pass for the employee, right? So if I just open it, I can see it here, right? So this one is for 66089 and this is the employee card. Now that you have seen the working solution, I hope you want to build the same for yourself. If you follow along this video till the end, I promise you that you should be able to make the same automation in your laptop. For all the files and the folders and the data which is being demonstrated here, in case you want the same, just drop me an email on the email ID which is mentioned in the description and I shall forward you the files for practice. Okay, so now moving forward, let's jump to the as is process. So when I say as is process, it means that what is the manual process which the business or the company or anyone is doing manually, right? So what is the manual process? So there are a number of employees or the visitors or students who are coming to an building or let's say college or universities, right? So everybody would require a gate pass or some kind of identity card, right? Now how do we create identity card? So I have a data which is particularly stored in some location. In our case, the data is stored in an Excel, which is a spreadsheet which is having data such as first name, last name, blood group, date of joining, and the photograph. Because whenever we are creating an identity card, we would require the photo also, right? Now, what is the next thing which happens? Now, an identity card is generated, and before the joining of the employee or before the visitor is visiting or the employee is joining, we usually send this ID card via an email and ask them to take a printout, right? So as of now, let us assume that this is the manual process, or I would say the as is process which is happening for this process. Okay, now what is the to be process, or I would like to say automated process, which means that if I implement the robot, how exactly the robot is going to do. So what would the robot do? So the robot is going to read the Excel which is specified at a designated location. It is going to filter out the valid record. So when I say valid record, it should know, right, that which ID should be created, which should not be created, is there any detail missing, right? So that means that we should only create ID cards for the valid records. So the robot should do that. It should read the photos also, because for ID card, as we already know, that we also require a photograph, and then generate those ID cards, and once generated, send it to an email. Now this email can be sent to the supervisor, or it can be directly sent to the employee, students, or to the visitors, right? So now I hope you understand what is the as is process and what is the automated process. Okay, now let's move forward. Now, every solution in ReFramework start with something which is called solution design approach, which means that how exactly the solution would look like in UiPath Studio. Fine. So let us see the automated solution here. So here, once we have read the Excel, we have filtered out the data. As you can see, I have highlighted the data tables in bold, which means that I am not going to upload this data to the orchestrator queues, meaning I am going to have a single RE framework where all the records would be used in a data table. We are going to read all the records one by one, generate the ID cards, and send the email. Okay, so now let us see what exactly we are going to do. First of all, we are going to convert the RE framework to be compatible with data table. The default RE framework work with the queue, so we are going to change that. How exactly can I change the RE framework with data table? The second thing is, we are going to create only one solution, as we have seen that we are not going to create a dispatcher or a performer. It would be a single robot. Next, we are going to convert the RE template to work with data tables. We are going to build the solution as per the business logic. When I am building the solution, I would need to manage the exception, right? Such as the business exception, system exception. While designing, we will think that what are the business exception, what could be the business exception, how to handle them, and what are the system exception and how to handle them. So we are going to deal with the exception handling also. And once everything is done, we are going to update the status back to the source Excel. Now, what does it mean? Because whenever we are using orchestrator queues, the status is available in the orchestrator queue for each transaction, right? This we have already seen in the previous video of dispatcher and performer. But now, since we are using data table to backtrack or to have a logging mechanism, we need to have the status somewhere in the spreadsheet, right? So for each and every item in the Excel, we are going to update the status back to it. And all of this we are going to see by a step-by-step demonstration. Okay, so now moving forward, let us check what are all the files which we have kept, what is the folder structure, and what are the things that we require to build this automation. Okay, so first of all, I have this Excel which I call the data, which is having all the data for the name of the employees, for the department, their employee ID, date of joining maybe, and their blood group, right? So this is all the data for all the employees who want to create a gate pass, or it may be students for them who want to create the identity card or anything, right? So this data I have kept in my folder, in my D project folder, ID card data. So this is the Excel which is called data.xlsx. Okay, now what else? For all of these employee, if you are looking at something, there is something which is called employee code, right? So employee code should be unique and it should not be blank. Next, I have a image folder with me. In the images folder, I have some of the photographs. The name of the photograph corresponds to the employee code of the employee. So for example, if I have to create an identity card for Brittany, I would require the employee code, which is 50886. I'll come to the folder, and for 50886, this is the image which Brittany holds. So the ID card will be created with this image. Okay, so I hope you understand the input file, that this is a Excel. Then we have some folder. Now to create the identity card, I would require some form of a template, right, where the bot is going to keep the data and keep on generating it, right? So as of now, I have created a Word file which looks something like this. So this is a plain Word file which I have put some sample images. So the idea is the bot will come to this form. It will fill in all these details from the Excel sheet. It will replace this image. It will create a ID card PDF, and then it will send that PDF as an attachment to the supervisor or to the directly to the employee. Okay. Now if you see here, for some of the employees the date of joining is blank, right? For some of the employees the employee code is blank. For this also it is blank, right? So for all of these such cases we are going to raise a business exception, which means that we are going to tell the admin that yes, for all of this we are not able to create the ID card because of this reason, right? And we are also going to have a status column, something here like this, which would update after each transaction. So for example, if ID card is created successfully, it will say created. If it is not created and is having a business exception, it will say business exception, system exception, success. Like something like this we are going to build to keep the track of which all employee cards have been generated. Okay, so card data, having all the employee data, I have a folder which is having images. Now how do we relate? The employee code is nothing but the name in the images, and then I have a template which needs to be fulfilled to create the identity cards. Okay, so now in case you also want to follow along this tutorial and want all of this file, feel free to drop me a note on the email ID which is mentioned in the description, and I will forward you this file so that you can also practice along with me, and at the end of this video we both have the same use case in my UiPath. Okay. Video wise, I have divided the use case into two parts. In the first part, we would be looking at the problem statement. We would be converting the default ReFramework to work with data tables. We would read the data and create the transactions. And in terms of ReFramework, we would be covering the init, get transaction, and the end process. In the part 2 of the video, we would be looking at how to create ID cards in editable as well as in the PDF format. We'll update the status back to the input Excel, send the ID cards in the email, and we are going to cover the process.xaml. Also, at any point, if you want to jump to a specific section in the video, you can always use the timestamps which are available in the description. Just click on the timestamp and the video shall navigate to the point which you are interested in. Okay, so I am back in my UiPath studio and we can start creating the project. Before I start the project, I am in the classic version of UiPath, which means that if I go to the settings, in the design, you would see there is an option which is called use modern folder for new project. This is toggled off for me, right? So in case you are looking for this tutorial, you also want to have the same look and feel, make sure that you have toggled this off for the new projects. Now let me go back to the start menu, and from here I will choose something which is called Robotics Enterprise Framework. Whenever we are building a transactional process with large scale deployment, we prefer to use the RE framework. Now it will just wait for the project template to get loaded. Provide a name, right? So the name should be proper as per the naming convention. So I would just call this as ID card generator, and I would say that RE framework for ID card generation. Fine. So whenever we are making any project, make sure you put the name correctly, and I hit create. We'll just wait for the automation to fire up. Once the automation is loaded, I will go and click on the open main workflow. This will open the main of Robotics Enterprise Framework for me. First thing first, whenever you start a process, always provide this description. So what is the process title? So the process title for me is ID card generation, right? So we always do the development with the proper best practices. Now what is the process description? The process description is process for generating the ID cards. Okay, so update that. You can provide other information as well. So for example, who is the author? So for me, the author, I am the author, so just putting my name. Fine. So this is the ReFramework, which is built entirely on the top of state machine. In case you don't understand what is state machine, what are all these stages, I have a dedicated playlist explaining all of these details. So I have provided the links in the description of state machine of each and every state, right? So go ahead and watch that video. You will get a clear understanding. Okay, so now let's start with the automation. As you can see, the first thing in the RE framework you would see is the start button, which means that if I start this process, the first thing is it will go here, and then the first state it will execute is the initialization. In here, if you read, it says that it is responsible for reading the configuration file and initialize all the applications which are used in this process. Now what is that? I'll double click on it. So the first thing, the first activity in the RE framework is the assign activity, which says system exception is equal to nothing. If I go to the variable, you will notice that the system exception is an exception type object and it is set to nothing, which means RE framework is telling me this is the start of the process. We have not started anything and there is no exception at all, right? Which makes sense, right? So what is the next activity? The next activity is a sequence which says if this is the first run, read the configuration file. Now what is the configuration file? If we notice in the project, in the data folder, I have something which is called a config file. Now what is this config file? All the things or all the settings or configuration which might change in future or which might vary from environment to environment are kept as a part of config file. Now just give you an example. For example, the orchestrator queue name in the development is ABC. Now, and when you move this process from a development to the testing or production, you want to have a different queue name. So you do not want to change the code. Rather, I can simply come here and update this thing. And other example which relates to our automation, as of now, as we have seen, I have kept the data in this path, which is D data project ID card data. I give this automation to you or to any of the company or any of the project, let's say, and they do not have a D drive in this machine, or they do not have a D colon itself. Now, if I always read it from D data, they would have to create the drives. Rather, what I will do is I will keep this path in the config file. Now, as per their requirement, the person can come to the config file and update the path as per their requirement. So config file is simple. Whatever things which we think can change in future and should be kept configurable are kept in config file. Okay. Now RE framework by default reads this config file in this block, which is called is first run read the config file. Is there anything I need to change here? Answer is no. Further, if I go to the flow, you would notice that there is a log message which says that what is the resolution of the screen. I'll leave this to the default settings. This is the XAML which is called Init All Settings. This is responsible for reading the config file. So what would happen after this flow is executed? All of this data, this one and this one, would be available to me in a form of a dictionary. How do I know? If I click on import arguments, you could see RE framework is telling me that I am reading this file from data and config. I am going to read these two sheets, and as an output I am going to give you the config dictionary, which is nothing but a string and object. Now after this block, in my entire automation, I am going to use this config object, which is this one. So no need to change anything here as well. Okay, let's go to the next one. Is orchestrator queue name is specified? In case if the orchestrator queue name is specified or not. Now if you read here, this is for the backward compatibility of 2018.3. I am in the newest version, so I do not need to change this as well, and I can keep this as blank. So ideally this is coming when you have provided the queue name in the orchestrator. Okay, so now you do not have to change anything here also. Okay, now what is this? This one is again for the backward compatibility. No need to change anything here. This is important. Kill all process. So what is this kill all process? Kill all process is the XAML which is responsible for cleaning up the environment. A simple question to all of you. For example, I am starting an automation And as we know that my automation is going to make use of Excel and the Word. But what happen if my automation triggers at, let's say, 9 a.m. in the morning, and 8:30 a.m. in the morning somebody has opened a very big file in Excel and the Excel is corrupt, or the Word is getting stuck, or it has hanged. So rather what I would want is that whenever I start my automation and do any of the operation, I make sure my environment is clean. When I say my environment is clean, I want to make sure that I close or kill all the exes which are open by default. So that is the task of kill all process. All you have to do is just click on open workflow. In here it says use the kill process activity to termination of the Windows processes. Now it means that killing is like killing from the task manager. So if I go to the task manager here, I can see the Excel is open here, right? So my automation is going to use Excel. So I am telling UiPath that before you do any of the automation, I want you to kill the Excel. So UiPath will go here, right click, and it will end the task, right? So that is what kill process do. Kill process is a simple XAML where you have to think that what all exes you are using, right? So for me, I am using Excel. I'll go to the activity, drag and drop an activity called kill process, drag and drop it here. Don't put it before, put it after the log one, because these are the logs which would help me to trace the output, right? Now, what is the process name? The process name for Excel is EXEL, Excel. So I'll go to kill process, go to the properties, and make sure you change the default name. So it help in debugging, okay, in case of any exception. Now, also we are going to use Word, because that is, we have seen that the Word template which we have kept here, it's an id form.doc, it is in Word file, right? But what should I use as a process name? So it's absolutely simple. Just go here, type MS Word. I go here, right click, and let's say open file location. So this is the Word, and if I go to the properties, okay, so this is the Word. So the exe name is winword.exe. Okay, so you just have to copy the winword from here, come back to UiPath Studio, and in here you have to just specify winword. You do not have to put .exe. And this one I am doing it for kill process for Word. Why we are killing both of them? Because these are the two things which my automation is using. I'll hit quick save and close this one. That's it. I do not have to do anything in the kill all process. Kill all process is just used to clean up the environment. Now what would happen if I run this automation? It would read the config file, and then if there are any instances of the Word or the Excel open, it will simply go and close all of them. Okay, so this is done. Now what is the next thing? This is just adding a log message. We can leave this to the default settings. And if I just collapse this, okay, like this, so we are done with this one. After that, there is a next sequence which is for max consecutive system exception. Now what is this? If you go to the config file, you would see that there is something which is called max consecutive system exception, and the value is 0. So if you read the description, it says the number of consecutive system exception allowed. If the maximum value is reached, the job is stopped. To disable this feature, set the value to 0. So this feature is useful. For example, you are writing any automation and you have got 10 transaction. Out of those 10 transaction, you are continuously getting a system exception. System exception for transaction 1, system exception for transaction 2, system exception for transaction 3. Now, do you want to run it for the entire piece, or you want to stop at 3? If you are continuously getting system exception and you want to instruct ReFramework that after 3 system exception, stop the process, just come here, change this number to 3, and it will stop after 3, right? So that is the max consecutive system exception. As of now, we can leave this to the default setting. The same thing applies here. It is just checking, and it will check and it will throw the exception, right? So as of now, you can leave this to the default setting for our example. Okay, this is also done. Now what is the next thing? The next thing is init all application workflow. Now init all application workflow is used to initialize all the application which we are going to use in this automation. If I click on open workflow, so in the open workflow you will see it says opening of the application. So do I have to open any application? Let us go back and think our automation, right? We are going to read the data from the Excel, create the identity card with the help of photos which are kept in a folder, and then we have to generate the identity card and send via email. There are no application which has to be opened. But in case we are writing a different solution, maybe where I have to log into a browser, or where I have to open an application, let's say SAP or a mainframe. So in here I will write the code to open that application. For our use case, the open application would be blank, so I will leave this to the default settings and I don't need to change anything here because I do not have anything which I need to open, right? So I'll just close this. So after that there is an exception block. So if I just go to the try, you could see that my complete try block is done, right? Now there was the first activity which was called system exception, which was set to nothing. Now whenever I am doing all of these operations, right, reading the config and opening the application, I might get a system exception, right? My system might not respond, I may not be able to read the config file, or I may not be able to kill. Now all of these scenarios, what would happen, all this exception would be caught and it will thrown to the exception block. Now why this block will catch? Because exception is the parent of all the exception. So whichever exception we throw from the try, all will be caught in this block. Now I'll take a pause. If you do not understand exception handling, that what is try, catch, exception, what is a parent exception, I have explained these things in detail in both English as well as Hindi language. I have put the links in the description for exception handling, so you can refer that directly from there. Okay, going forward, in the try block, whatever exception we get, all those exception would be caught here in the system exception object. Now if you remember at the beginning, I told you that ReFramework says I don't have any exception. In the catch block, if any exception is there, we just assign that value to that variable. Now why we are assigning this value to a variable, that is important. If you remember from our lessons of state machine, this is the initialization block, right? And this is built on state machine, which means this has entry and this has transition. Now if you would see, I will just go one step back. It says in case of system exception, it should go to end process. But how would this ReFramework know that yes, I have got some exception? So that simple logic applies in this line. It says system exception is nothing, which means that still it is blank. So you can go to the next stage, which is get transaction data. But if system exception object, which was set to nothing at the top, if that object is not nothing, that means you have got some exception. So you just simply log a message which says system exception and you end the process, right? So that is what happens in the ReFramework. First you initialize, you try to open the application, you try to read the configuration file. If anything wrong happens, you simply go and you end the process. If everything successful, you go and get the transaction data. Okay, now for us, we are not building this in a dispatcher and a performer model, right? We are building in a simple sequence. So which means that for me the transaction data is not a queue data. I have to get the transaction data in this flow only. So this is the place in the initialization where I will read the data. Now where is my input? Input is this Excel, which is located at this location, the project ID card. If I have to use this process in a dispatcher and performer, so I could have loaded all this data into the queue and then we read it from the queue. In case you want to know how to make a solution with dispatcher performer, you can see the link in the description and you can refer that. This solution we are targeting that how we can use a solution with data tables. So for me here, if I just go to the main, you would see that in the next state, which is get transaction data, I need to process the transaction one by one. Now what is a transaction? A transaction is something which get repeated one by one. So for example, if I ask you what is the transaction here, this is one transaction, this is the second transaction, this is the third transaction, this is the fourth transaction, which means that I have to do the same operation for all of them. So my transaction is nothing but a data row. Now why I am telling a data row? Because when I read this data in Excel, when I use an activity called read range, I will get a data table. And what is a data table? A data table is a collection of data rows. So that's why my transaction now becomes a data row. Okay. So now in the get transaction data, I will be iterating each and every data row. But for that, I need to first have the data, right? What would I iterate? So this guy will tell me, you tell me what should I iterate? But I do not have anything to iterate. So that means that I would have to read my data first where in the initialization block. So let me just quickly open the initialization block. I will just open it here. Now we understand that we have to read the data in the initialization. But in the initialization, where should I read? Should I read it here? Should I read it here? Should I read it here? Or after this, inside this, right? So the answer to your question is that you should always read the data inside this block, which is if first run read this object, right? Why I am doing this? Because this block will execute only once. How it will execute only once? There is no rocket science, right? What happens if you go here in the initialization? If the config is read, right, as we have seen, the config is read and it gives me a dictionary. Now this simply check if the dictionary is initialized, it won't execute any of this operation again. If config is nothing, that means if it is blank, then only it will execute. But if it is not blank, it will skip all of this. As simple as that. Now let us see why actually I want to write the code here. So for example, I have got 10 transaction. So let's say taking this example, I have got these transactions which are added here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's say 4 were successful. Okay, I'll just mark them as green. So what happens in the initialization? We have read all the data. In the get transaction, we are getting all the data rows one by one, and in the process transaction, we are processing one by one. Now what happened? When I was processing 1, 2, 3, 4, everything was good. When I was processing transaction number 5, I got a system exception. Okay, this got read and I got a system exception in number 5. Okay, let me just change the color. I got a system exception here. Now if you go to the default ReFramework, what happens? You got a system exception, it will again go to initialize the process. But I already have these items loaded, right? So I do not want to load everything again, right? I want it to start from this item only. So that means I only want to read the data once. But if let's say in case of system exception, I come in the initialization block here. In the initialization block, if I keep my reading code outside somewhere here, or somewhere here in this plus, what would happen? Every time a system exception come, it will again go and read all the data that I do not want. What I simply want is that whenever there is a system exception happening, you do not want to read the complete data again. So how can I control that? It's absolutely simple. All you have to do is in the first run, right, which is this guy, if the first run read the configuration file, right, so that means this will only run once. So we would write the code to load the data table in here. So I'll go here. This is the place where I should write, right? Now I'll go here and create a new sequence. I will tell this sequence as read the data from Excel and hit create. Now this is a blank SQL. Now how do we read the data? To read the data, we can always use an activity which is called Excel application scope. Now Excel application scope will ask me, tell me where is your workbook. Okay, so if my workbook is here, where is my workbook? I'll just point it to, okay, I'll go to my D drive in the data project ID file. This is the data.xlsx, right? Now, how do we read the sheet? We use an activity which is called read range. I'll drag and drop. You can always use the workbook as well, but I have Excel, so I'm using Excel. In case you don't understand what is Excel, what are all these activities, there is a dedicated playlist only and only on Excel. Okay, now read range. What is the name of the sheet? The name of the sheet is card data. So all I have to go here and say card data, card data. That's it, right? Now, do I want to read the complete range? Yes, I want to read this complete range from here. So I will just keep it to the default setting in the properties. Does my data have headers? Okay, yes, we do have the headers, right? So I keep it as check. What is the output? The output is a data table, right? Now, what is a data table? All of these value would be available in a data table for me. Now, how do I create a variable? There is an easy way. I hit Control plus K and I write dt underscore data, or say input, dt underscore data input, right? So I have created a data table here. Now, you might be thinking, Mukesh, you could have directly written the code here, right? Read range Excel applications. So why you have created a separate flow? The first thing is I can easily debug. My code is segregated. If I write everything here, if I want to test this piece of code, only this piece of code, I have to run the automation from main. But now I have segregated it. I can actually individually run this process, right? Now, what is the next thing? Whenever we write a production ready code, always make sure that you add log messages. Now, logs can be of two types. It can be of custom logs or it can be orchestrator logs. As of now, I'm using orchestrator logs. So why I'm using this? Because I want to see the result, that what is happening in the process. So I just say here the total count of records, and I say dt data input dot rows dot count dot toString. Okay, so what does I have written? I'll quickly show it to you for your reference. So I have written the total count of the records is whatever data table, count the number of rows and print it. So that way, whenever I am debugging, I know that, okay, this many number of transactions are there. Okay, so what is the benefit of using this? I can go here, I will just close this one and I say don't save. Okay, what is the benefit of using it like this? I can actually go and run only this flow, right? So I can go here and I say run the file. So I am telling UiPath to run only this file. Okay, so let us just wait for the execution to complete. Okay, the robot completed and I can see the total count of records is 16. That means my workflow is working fine. Now, whenever we write any automation, make sure we always do the exception handling as well. Now, what is exception handling? Why it is important? I again have a dedicated series targeting exception handling. So feel free to explore that. Let me quickly do the exception handling here. Right click on this one and say surround with try catch. So what I mean here, in case of any exception, why I'm using system.exception? Because that is the parent of all the exception, right? So in case of any exception which is happening in this file, I want to log an error message and I am going to write the exception here. Now what this will do, in case of any exception which is happening, exception dot toString, because it's a string. So in case of any exception while reading this data, let's say the file is not available or any exception, it will simply go and log the message. Now the question arises, do I want to stop the process or do I want to continue the process? Yes, I want to stop the process because this is the entry point for me, right? If my data is not available, my transaction data is not available, there is no point in running the automation further. To stop the process, we simply use an activity called rethrow, right? So I just go here and say rethrow, drag and drop it here. Now this rethrow will make sure that this exception is thrown to the parent and the parent would nothing be the main, and it will take it to the end state. Right now, if you don't understand rethrow, please watch the throw versus rethrow video, that will clear your understanding. Now again, the best practice, rethrow the exception. Okay, now you might be thinking, Mukesh, you have completed it, but the values are hard coded, right? What happens if I give this project to you and you do not have it, right? So we'll just change it. It's a very easy thing. So first of all, let me go to the main. So now I hope you understand that where exactly I need to call this. I need to call this inside the first run. Okay, this one. I open the first run. At the bottom here in the plus, I go to the project, and you could see that read data from Excel is there, right? So again, one more best practice, you always do not have to scatter all this thing here. So I just go and create a new folder here. You can do it like this. Sorry, my bad. I'll close the dependencies. I'll go to here and I say add a new folder, and I say that this is the folder where my transaction data, or you can rename it anything, right? I want to keep all these xamls in a single place, right? So let me just go and collapse all. Now, so I have created a new folder which is called transaction data. My bad, let me just rename it tr transaction data, and I just drag and drop it inside this, so it looks neater, right? And in case in future I want to refer, I can know that okay, so this is the xaml. Now we know that we have to invoke this thing in the first run. This is the xaml, and at the end here I simply have to drag and drop this one. That's it, my job is done, right? So here we are telling that you invoke the data. Now as of now, I have not passed the values from the config. Now, why this thing here? If you see, when the config is read here, as an output, I am getting this config object. So this config object is having all of these values, right? So I want to pass this config to my flow. So what I have to do is, for my flow, if I go to my flow, for my this flow, the config object is an input, right? So if you remember, if you see here, for this flow, init all settings, the config object was output. So that's why the direction is out. For me, it is input. So in my flow, I will go to the arguments. I will say here in underscore config. Again, this is one of the best practice, that for the arguments you can specify here in, specify the direction. Now it will ask me what is the type argument. So the type argument is a config. And what is a config? Let me go back here. If you can see in the properties, the config is a dictionary of string and object. Okay, so we can always go here and, but I do not find a dictionary of string and object. All I have to do is click on browse for types, search here dictionary, TIONARY. Okay, let it load. Okay, so in the MS Corlib you would see dictionary, and this one you have to take the generic one, T key and value, which means you can select the value here. So dictionary is string and this is object. I hit OK, and this is the same thing, right? Dictionary of string and object. Go here and save the automation. Now what is this automation doing? This automation is saying that the config is an input for me. Okay, so I'll go here again. Now if I click on this one, it says there is some argument which needs a value. I click on import arguments and it says that okay, you have to provide the config. Now where is the config? I go here. See, the config is stored in a variable which is of config C capital, right? So if I go here in the import arguments, I have to simply pass the config here. So again, I have a dedicated video which is made on the arguments in out. Go ahead and refer that, but I hope now you understand that what this thing is. So we are just passing the config object from one workflow to another workflow, right? So this is argument passing. Now this is done. Now inside this workflow, now I have the config object here. Now this path I do not want to hard code. So this path I will just do a control X from here, right? We do not want to hard code anything, right? So we'll go to the settings and in the value I will pass thing here. So this means that I want to keep this thing configurable. Now what is this thing? This is the path of Excel. You can name it any meaningful name. Again, a best practice, always make sure you write the description, input Excel path. Otherwise, if I give this config to you, how would you know, right, what is this? So always think that there is some other developer or some other resource who is going to make use of it. Okay, so I say here path of Excel, so this is one. So I just go and hit save. Now in my UiPath, how do we read the value from the Excel? This is the key and this is the value. So all we are interested in the key. So path of Excel, just copy this, go back to UiPath, and in here I am telling UiPath that now you don't have to use this hard-coded path. You have to use the data from config. So now it will ask me where is the config. The config is nothing but the argument here, right? From the config, if I just do it like this, you say it is asking me that key as string, give me the key as string. So if I go here, what is the key? This is the key. Copy this, go back here, in the double quotes, it's a string, right? And dot to string. That's it. Now what would happen when this automation will run? It will read the Excel path from this one, path Excel. So this path Excel should actually match this path Excel. If this is not there, then it would say that path does not exist, or you would get an error that the key is not available. Fine. So what else? Now what might happen that someday you might not have this card data sheet, right? So again, it's very simple. I am making this thing as sheet name here also configurable, right? So that we don't want any issue later on when we give this automation to someone else, right? Sheet name of the data sheet. Okay, now again the same thing. This is the sheet name. Copy this, go back here, in the card data, nothing hard coded, we say in config. From the config, get the value from the sheet name key, and now you pass it here. My workflow is done, right? Now if I come back here in the main workflow, this is going to read all this data, whatever data I was showing, which is this data.xlsx, and it is going to give me back. But you might be thinking, Mukesh, the data is still inside here, right? We do not have passed the data outside of this flow. So if you will see, we have read the data, we have stored the data in a data table, we have printed the count, but we have never given this data out of this workflow, and that's a valid argument, right? So that's mean we have to create an argument here. Now what would be the type of argument? The type of argument would be out, right? So let me quickly create an out underscore data table, right? Or we can say that out underscore data simply. So this out data is nothing but the data which we are going to pass outside from this workflow. Now you might be thinking why we are passing out. Because in the main workflow here, I want to use this data for get transaction data. But if I do not pass the data output from here, how would the outside XAMLs know, right? So I am again in the initialization here. So this is the place where we have called in the, from here we are passing an out, and this is an out, and what is the type? It should be data table, right? Because whenever we read, we get something in the data table, dt data input, right? So if we can check here variables, dt data input was the data table. So I'll go to here, and out data is a data table. Now how do I pass this data? I simply use an assign activity, okay, and in the out data, just pass the data which you are getting from the Excel, right? So assign out data, that's it, job done, right? So again, you can always use this out data directly in the read range. That will save you from one assign activity, but I have already done it, so I'm doing like this. Okay, so this is done. My first sequence is done where I am reading all the data from the Excel. We have done the exception handling, we have done the best practices, and now let's go back here, and it says import the argument, right? Now it is telling me that I am giving something output. Where do you want to store? This is the same concept here. config is saying that I am passing the config object. Where do you want to store? So I've created a variable here. Now here also I will go here, easy way, come here and hit control plus K, and I will call this as dt underscore input data. Now what would happen? UiPath will create this variable automatically for me, like this. It is of type data table and it is restricted only to first run. Fine. So as of now we'll keep it to the default settings, right? Now what happens when I run this automation till this point? I will get that count and my data table would be loaded. No need to change anything here. We do not have any applications to open, so we are good with the initialization block. Now let us go to the next settings, which is called the get transaction data. Now in the get transaction data, what actually happens, we get all the transaction one by one, which means that now I have got all the transaction in the data table. Let's quickly check how does the transaction look. Okay, so to quickly check that, what I will do is I will go here and in the open workflow, let us see what is the data, how the data is coming, right? So I will quickly go here and put a breakpoint here. When I put a breakpoint, which means that I should be able to see what is happening in the background, right? I would be able to see the values, everything here. Let me go to main. I go here and I say debug the project. Now I have put a debugger there. Okay, so ideally it should give me an error because I think the config is open at the bottom. Let's see. Yes, so it will give me an error saying that the config is open, initializing the settings. So these are the logs, right? And you see that it is telling me that you have opened the config. So let me go here, save the config. So this is a thing which you can do while debugging. So I'll just close this Excel as well. I'll go and save the config again, close this, and now I can say retry. This is an option which you get while debugging, right? So I have retrying that activity. So let's see, yes, and now it was able to retry this. So now it is killing the process. It will first kill the Excel, it will first kill the Word, and then if you will see, it has opened this Excel and it has read the data. We have got a 16. Now if you see out data, in the out data, as of now the no data has been assigned, right? So dt input data, this is the data, right? So all of the data is coming here. So now this data is my transaction data. All of this data, whatever you are looking on the screen, is the transaction data, and all of this is nothing but a transaction row. So that means we are good till this point. If I click on step into, as you can see, as of now the out data is null. Step into, so now out data have all the same values which we are getting, right? So for me this data is coming as transaction data, which is nothing but a data table. Now how is the data table created? The data table is created by using data rows. So all of these are nothing but the data rows. Okay, so this looks good. Okay, so I can stop the process here, debugging here, and then let's move forward. Okay, now if this is successful, in case it was successful, we want to pass the data to get transaction. What is the next state? We want to go to the get transaction data. But how do we know it is successful? Again the same concept, I'll quickly show you, because this is a state machine, and in the state machine we say that if there is no system exception, we go to get transaction data. As simple as that. Now in the get transaction data, if I have to use the orchestrator queues, right, so then I would have to make the transaction item as the queue item. If you go to the variables here, you would see by default ReFramework is coded to work with queue items, which means that it works best with the queue item. But in our case, we want to change it to data row, because my transaction data is nothing but a data table. So the first change which you have to do in ReFramework is you have to change this transaction item from queue item to a data row, not data table, it's a data row. I go to here in the browse for types, I just type here data row. Now I hope you understand why we are taking data row, because I have a data table as an input. Now as soon as I make this as data row, there would be a lot of errors which we would be getting, right? So now the first thing we have to change here is this one. I have already changed this to data row. Now get transaction data. This is the XAML who is responsible for getting the transaction one by one from the data table, right? So as of now my data table has a count of 16, so that means this will run 16 times. So if I click on open workflow, by default the get transaction data is supposed to work with the queue item, so that's why it has an activity which is called get transaction item. If I go to the properties, it is for queue item, so we are not using it. I simply go and hit Ctrl plus D, which is disabling of this activity, right? So I have disabled this activity, right? Now what is the out argument here? So if you see here, the out transaction item is here queue item. So get transaction data will read all the data one by one from the collection. So for me the transaction item will be nothing but a queue data row. So I have changed the transaction item to a data row. Now if you will see here, I am getting no any errors, right? But you might be thinking, Mukesh, you have never written a logic to get the values one by one from the queue, and that is absolutely true. We have not written any value. If I have to use orchestrator queues, you would see ReFramework was getting the data and storing the data in transaction item, which was nothing but a queue item. But now here I have changed the transaction item to a data row, which means that I would require a data table. So if you see here, if a new transaction is retrieved and all of these things, I can leave it to the default setting. This works good. The only thing which I have to change here is I have to read the data from the data table. Now where is my data table? My data table is somewhere here. So let us first get rid of this error. What is this? So here it says it is not able to pass out transaction item is a queue item, right? So let me go here, the transaction item we have updated it to data row. So let me go here and save this, because if you not save, the change would not reflect. Let me go back here in the main import arguments, and the still I have one error. Let me see what it is. Okay, it's gone. Okay, fine. So get transaction data, as of now I am telling UiPath that you have to give me a data row in form of this transaction item. Now UiPath will ask me, okay, I will give you this transaction item but in the form of a data row, but you need to provide me a data table, right? Where is your data table? So UiPath is telling me that I am already passing a data table which is called DT transaction data. If you want, pass your data table to this data table and I will take care of everything. Okay, so if you see here in the default ReFramework, there is one IO argument which is input output argument, which is of the type data table, right? So I can make use of this transaction data actually. So for me, my transaction data is sitting where? My transaction data is available in the initialization block, right? So my transaction data is available here. In here we have just passed the transaction data and it is available in this variable of dt input data. Now I have seen in the, let me go back to the get transaction data. Okay, so I'll go here in the get transaction data. In this one I have just seen that there is already a transaction data which is getting passed to the get transaction data. So why don't we use this one, dt transaction data? So I'll go back here in the initialization, wherever my data table or the complete data table is getting loaded, which is here, it is in this dt input data variable. I will just use an assign activity here and I will simply tell dt transaction data is nothing but dt input data. What it means, whatever data I have in dt input data just passes to the dt transaction data. Both of them are data table, that's why I am getting no errors. Again, a best practice, assign the input data to transactions. That's it. Now what would happen? When I am running this flow, it will go to the initialization. It will get all the 16 records. If everything is successful, it will come to get transaction data. In the get transaction data, the data would be passed inside this workflow in this variable. Which is this variable? The variable is already getting passed here. Its name is dt transaction data, and once it is getting passed, I will get something one by one, right? Because it is get transaction data, get the data one by one, and I would be getting it in a form of out transaction item. So if you see here in the variable, the transaction item, we have already updated the transaction item to data row. So all I have to do here is go to the import arguments and pass the transaction item variable here. So when we change the type, it might have got changed, removed actually. So that's it. My job is done. Now let me click on open workflow, and now we will write a logic to get the transactions one by one. And now my transaction is nothing but a transaction item is nothing but a data row. How do I know? I have just changed it here. Our transaction item is equal to data row. Fine. So now I need to write a logic to get the items one by one. So if you will notice, the default one was taking the data from the get transaction item. We have just commented it. So let me quickly go and I will just do uncomment. Okay, I will just uncomment it, enable the activity, and I will just say here, okay, so this one I'll just delete this. Okay, now in here, if you see, previously we were reading the data from the queue, but now we want to read the data one by one from the data table. Now I have just passed the data table here. My data table is coming in this one, DT transaction data, and I want to get the rows one by one from the data table. Now it's absolutely simple. To get the data row, I will use an activity which is called the assign activity. Now what happens in a data table? So let me quickly open this data for you. Whenever we read a data in the data table, the index of the data start from 0. So this is my row 0, this is my row 1, this is my row 2, this is my row 3, and so on, right? So for example, as of now, I have this complete thing in my data table. My data table is nothing but IO transaction data, right? So this complete data is available in IO transaction data, which is this variable. What is available? This complete thing is available. Now I want to get all these row one by one, which means if I need to go the first rows, I need to specify here 0. If I want to get the second row, I would need to specify here 1, right? So I need to specify here 1. If I want to get the third row, I would have to specify here 2, because the transaction start from 0. Now till when I have to work? I have to keep working till the count of 15, right? So this is the condition, because if I just go and write here dt count of 16, now it will be try looking for the 17th item, which is not available, right? And my automation will fail. That is why I have to make sure that I am running this loop only till 14. Now what is this 14? This 14 is nothing. What is this 14? This 14 is total count minus 1, right? Whatever count you are having in the data table minus 1, till this you have to run this loop. Okay, and to get the first item you have to use the 0 1 2 like this. Let us try to implement the same logic in the get transaction data. In here, what do I want to get? I want to get a transaction item. The transaction item is a data row, so I just write here transaction item, right? So transaction item is out transaction item, right? So I go here and write out transaction item. Now what is this out transaction item? This out transaction item is nothing but it is coming from the transaction data, which is nothing but my IO DT transaction data, right? We have just seen dot rows, okay, of what? 0. But if I write here 0, it will always give me the first row. If I write it here 1, it will always give me 1. So I need a kind of a increment number. Now that incrementing number in ReFramework is called the transaction number, right? Let me go one step back, and if you notice here, ReFramework is already passing a transaction number here. Now if I just go to the variables, you would notice the default value of transaction number is 1, which means the transaction number in ReFramework starting from 1. But if I go here inside the open workflow, in here, if I directly use the transaction number here instead of 0, if I just use the in transaction number, what would happen? It will skip the first row of data, because transaction 1 will give me this record, Williams record, right? But I want Brittany record as well. So that is where I would just do a -1, right? So 1 minus 1 equal to 0. So that's where my transaction will give me the first record, second record, third record, and like that, right? So this is the name. Let me change this one. This one is get the items one by one. But now you might be thinking, who will increment the count? First time you have made, okay, 1. Who is going to increment this count? So if you are familiar with the ReFramework videos which we have done previously, this count is getting increment in the process transaction which we are going to see. So as of now, for this workflow, you have to just change only this thing. Okay, I forgot to do one thing. This has to be done only till this count is less than 15, right? So as of now, the first time the transaction number would be 0, right? So 0 is less than 15, condition true. So we need to fetch it, right? Second time 1 is less than 15, condition true. So if I come here, which is 14, right? So I have to run this loop till 14. If 14 is less than 15, condition true, right? Fetch the record. But when I come to the next record, which is would be the 16th record, for example, it would be 16 here. Is 16 less than 15? The condition is false. So that means I have to run this loop only till this reaches 15, because if I keep continuing running it, what would happen? It will go in an infinite loop. So I'll simply use an if activity here. Now what is this if activity? In the if activity, I am simply checking if the in transaction number is less than the data table count. IO transaction data dot rows dot count dot rows dot count. Okay, so till this condition is true, you go and you do this thing, otherwise you skip this loop. Okay, so now if you see here, the transaction number, when it will come to here, the transaction number would be the transaction number starting from 1, right? So it will come here till this point, it will say okay 15, the transaction number would be 14, 15 minus 1, because we are already doing a -1. So what is the row count? The row count is 15. 14 is less than 15, condition true, it will run. But when it is coming for the 16th time, 16th would condition fail and it will come out of the loop, right? So in case if it is the case, then what I want you to do, then I want to tell UiPath that your transaction item is now nothing. Okay, NOTHING, nothing. That's it. I hope now you understand this. So in the if condition, I will say that check the data table count. Okay, and this one is if we have a valid record, if we have that record available in data table, we'll use this. Otherwise I'll go here and I say no record, and in case of no record, it will simply say that our transaction data is nothing, right? So this I have done. I will keep the default try catch here because this is already doing the exception handling for me. In the catch, what it is checking, let me quickly check. It is putting a warning message and this is rethrowing. So this works perfectly for me. So I hope now you understand this, that we have just removed the transaction item of the queue. We are getting the checking the transaction number less than the count, getting the transaction number -1 because the index start with 0, and this is done. So the get transaction data is also done. I no need to touch anything. In case the out transaction data is not nothing, right? So out transaction data, which is, sorry, my bad, out transaction item is not nothing, which means in this case, in case of valid record, what would happen in a valid record? It will set all these value. Now if you want, we can use these values also. Again, this depends, but I leave it to the default settings. Okay. Now let me go back to the get transaction data. In the get transaction data, you would notice that now we are getting all these values one by one from here. Okay. Now in the exception, it is showing me an exception of nothing. So actually this should work because the transaction item is a data item. So again, just remove this. Okay. If you are not able to get rid of this error, a simple hack here, use an assign activity and the same thing, right? This is also an assign activity, but use the same thing, copy, paste here and type here nothing. Okay, this is gone now, so I can get rid of this. Exactly the same thing, but sometime it takes some time to reflect. Okay, so now in the get transaction data, we are getting all the transaction one by one. How we are getting all the transaction one by one? Just passing the complete data table and I am getting the data row here. I am still getting some go here. Yes, the get transaction data looks good to me, right? Now what happens in the get transaction data? In the get transaction data, if I'm getting a new transaction, we process it, which means that if I'm getting a new row, we process it. If we are getting not any new row, we do not process it. But how would ReFramework know, right? So for this, it is an absolutely simple concept of state machine. If you click on this line of no data, what is this condition? Transaction item is not nothing, which means that I have got something in the transaction item, you process it. If transaction item is nothing, which means that I have got nothing in the transaction item, you end the process. Now if you go to the get transaction data, let me quickly show it to you that how the transaction data will be here. It is nothing but this same thing, right? If you remember here, if we are having a valid record, then we are setting the transaction item, otherwise we are setting it to nothing. So in case the transaction item is nothing, it will straight away go to end process, but if there is a new transaction, it will go to the process transaction. Okay, so now we have got the process transaction and we have read the data, everything here, we are passing the data table here. In the end process, we have to close all the processes and all the applications, right? So here, this is nothing, the same thing, close all application. I have not opened any of the application, so I do not need to close any of the application. So for me, I can keep this to the default settings as well. In case you have open any application such as browser, SAP, you have to come here and close the application as well. Okay. Now, in case I get a new transaction, I have to go to process transaction, and this is the place where I am having a lot of errors now, right? Because the default ReFramework is customized to work with the queues, but now we have changed the queue item to the data row. Same thing we need to update in process.xaml also. The first place is, if you go here, if I click on import argument, it is saying that the transaction item is a queue item and you are passing a data row. So in the process.xaml, open the workflow. Okay, in the arguments, the transaction item, change it to data row and save this. Close this, go back here, click on input arguments. Now transaction item is the same transaction item I will pass here, and this is the transaction item, right? Save. Process.transaction is sorted, right? Now there is an other XAML which is called set transaction status. So in the old ReFramework, in case some of you are experienced developer, you would have seen the set transaction status was part of the finally block here. right? But now there is a small modification which has been done in ReFramework. Now the set transaction status is now part of process XAML only, right? Now what is this set transaction? This ideally is responsible for updating the status of the queue item, but since I have already disabled the queue and we are not using queues, it is giving me this error, right? In the okay, I'll just drag it here. So you can see this is saying that you are passing a data table here, right? So the first thing is I'll go to set transaction status. In the argument, again the same thing, the transaction item is a queue item, right? So we just change it to data row. That's it. Now as soon as I change it to data row, all of these three are getting error. Now why this is giving error? Because the default ReFramework is updating the status of the queue item, but the success, if you go to the success, it is saying that if it is for success set transaction status, but I do not have the transaction status, so I just disable it. How do I disable? Control plus D, save this automation, go back, the success is sorted, go to business exception. This ideally is updating the business exception in the queue. I don't have queue, so I disable it. Control plus D, save this, go back here. In the system exception, again the same thing. If the transaction item is a queue item, in case of system exception, you have to do all of this, right? But for me, I do not have the system exception, right? So this one I do not require. So Control plus D and it's done. Okay. So now if I can see, I do not have anything here, right? Now you might be thinking, I told you, right? Who is increasing the counter? Who is increasing that counter from 0, 1, 2, 3? This is the guy. Increment the transaction index, right? You don't have to touch anything here. This is the guy who is responsible for incrementing the transaction number by 1. So first time it would be 0, next time 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So who does that? That is happening in the set transaction status. For our use case, this works. Let me hit Control plus S, save, go here, and let us check if anything is there. This looks good. Okay, so still I am having some error. What is that? Okay, so in the import arguments, okay, now it's gone. Fine, it takes some time to reflect. Okay, I didn't press Control S, I guess. Okay, so this is done. Now in the exception, this looks good. Okay, so my framework wise I am ready, right? So in the process transaction, now we are passing all these value one by one to the framework. Now before we code the process transaction and everything, let us try to see if we are able to get all these transaction item from data row one by one or not, right? So what I'll quickly do is, before I proceed with the process, let me quickly use an activity which is called write line activity maybe, and I just want to see what data I am getting in the transaction item. Am I getting it one by one or not, right? So the transaction item is nothing but this item. So first time it will give me this record. So let us try to print the name. Okay, so how do I, it's a name because I can see it in the data table. So I go here and in the in transaction item, I'll type here name dot to string. Now what would happen if I run this process? The process.xaml should get all those items one by one. Okay, so let us try to quickly save this. Okay, we'll try to run this automation in a debug mode and see how it behaves. I can see that there is some validation error which is coming in process transaction. Let us quickly fix that. I think that is coming in the set transaction status again. Okay, hit OK, do a Control plus S. In the business exception, in the try catch set transaction status, here we have already updated, but we need to click on the invoke workflow to make it reflect. Okay, so yes, I have changed nothing, but just clicked on import workflow and it is gone. Okay, so now this looks good. I have no errors. Now let us try to run this automation in debug mode. Okay, we will put debugger at the significant point so that we know that we are moving correct. The first point would be in the first location here, okay, where we are getting the count. We'll put a debugger here. Fine, that is the first run. The second run, we are going when we are reading the transaction one by one. So in the get transaction data, in here we will just put a debugger here and see if this thing works for us, right? And the third debugger I want to put is in the process transaction, where we want to check whether I am getting the data or not, right? So in the process.xaml open workflow, I'll just put a debugger here, 3 debuggers. Okay, let us do one thing. We'll close this. I'll say don't save. Okay, save everything, go here and debug. Let's see what happens. Okay, as you can see, the robot has started killing other processes. It would have killed the it would have killed the Excel. Now the total count of records was 16. Okay, so the first debugger is hit. Now if I go to the locals, right, so this is how you debug when you are doing any debugging or writing any code. As you can see, the DT transaction data, if I just go here and you can find it in the variable somewhere, DT transaction data as of now is null after this activity is executed. Now if I go back to the local, so the DT transaction data is having all these 16 records. Okay, so we are good here. I click on continue. Now it will take all these 16 records in the DT transaction data to my get transaction data. In the get transaction data, we are going to get this transaction one by one. So let us see what is the transaction number, right? So if I go to the locals, you could see the transaction number is 1, right? And what is the count? The count is 16. So 1 is less than 16, condition true, so it should go in the first part. Step into, and I have got the first transaction item. Let me quickly go to the locals and I can see that the transaction number was 1. Out transaction item, I have got a data row. You can click on this pencil icon and you can actually see that I have got a record for Brittany. So that was the first record. This looks good, right? I am getting the first record. Now I click on continue. So now ReFramework should take this record to process.xaml. Why it should take? Because if you see here, in case there is a new transaction of Brittany, it should now take it to process transaction, and we have kept a debugger there. So I'll hit on continue. Now Brittany's record will go to, see, processing transaction number 1 and starting the process. Step into, and yes, I am able to get the first name, right? Now if I click on continue, it will mark this as successful because we have not done anything as of now. It is again coming for the second record. Step into, right? So I can actually now get rid of this debugger. This looks good. Now if you notice here something, I have already put a debugger on the data table itself, right, at the top first run, but the process is not hitting the debugger because it is only supposed to execute once, right? So again it is giving me the second item. Okay, so I can actually get rid of this debugger now. I'll hit continue. So now it would go and check for the transaction number 2. Step into the second name. So if I just get rid of this transaction from here, you could see that it will do it for all the transaction. Let us, I'll just transaction number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that means we are successfully able to print all the transactions one by one from the data row, and we are passing all the transaction to process.xaml. So this I am passing in process.xaml. So that means all of this name, if I am able to get the name, that means I am able to get all the records. Now in the process.xaml, I can actually write the logic that what I need to do with this data, right? Now I will write the logic in the process.xaml to actually generate the ID cards, right? So we want to check one more logic, that after 16, it should not go beyond 16, right? It should stop at 16. So that is what I am just waiting for. So processing transaction number 10. So we total have 16 items, right? So we could have reduced it. Okay, so only 5 items are remaining. 12, 13, and after 16 it should say that there are no more transaction. Why? because the condition will become false. We'll just wait for 13, 14, 15 and get the transaction item. Finished due to no more transaction. So if I go to the output, it finished due to no more transaction. So total we have 16 items. It processed till 15, right? So if I go back here in the data, so what was the last record? Let us quickly verify. It was Shelward ever, and in the output I could see that it only run till Rudy McDade, right? So it skipped this one. Now why it has skipped? Because we have put here less than. Ideally it should be less than equal to, because the count is starting from 0. So that is why guys it is important to make sure that where your count is starting. So my counter is starting from 0, so that's why it should be less than equal to, right? So now if you will see here, I have just validated, it was just running till Rudy only, right? So I have till shill whatever. So I have made the changes. I'll click save. I have just made a less than equal to because the count is starting from 0. Now we can again revalidate it quickly. I'll close this Excel and now I will just say run. Now it would be very quick. Let's quickly see if we are able to get all the 16 records. Fine. So let us see now if you are able to print, it is able to print all the 16 rows. In the debugging, it would be slow, but when you are running the actual code, it would be a bit faster. As you can see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and finished due to no more transaction. If I go to the output, you could see the silver diver was also included, right? So for me, the condition that I need to update it was it's less than equal to. Okay, so that means now we are able to get all the transaction one by one in the process.xaml. Now this is the place where we are going to write the actual logic, which is the actual business logic.
Okay, so that is all for the part 1 of this video. We have explored the problem statement. We have converted the default RE framework to work with data table. At any point of time, if you want to convert only the RE framework to the data table, I have a dedicated section in the description which points out only to the section where we are making changes in the RE framework to work with data table. We have read the data, we have created a transaction, init, get transaction and process state is completed in this part. Now I would like to wrap this video here. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please do subscribe to the channel and happy automation.